Our exhortation this morning will be provided by Brother Joe Fordham. And his subject this morning is titled, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin. And he doesn't have an opening reading, so if we could please give our full attention to Brother Joe.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. There we go. So, this topic is one of a series, just so you understand it, of what God intended for man. And Jeroboam, son of Nebat, is one of three aggressive opportunists that kind of lumped in together with Joab and Absalom, because they were both very strategic, very intelligent, and knew how to twist people, influence people, manipulate people to get to where they wanted to go. Those three stand in contrast to the shepherd leaders, Moses, David, and Christ, who led God's way. And this is as a contrast to that, showing you what men do on their own accord to get what they want. In this case, Jeroboam has real application to today. And what we're going to learn about him is something you can definitely apply. If you don't get it by the end, I'll resurrect it again and we'll talk about it. But Jeroboam had tremendous potential. That's what I want you to see from the very beginning. He was chosen by God. He was given an office, a position, power, authority, and he gave in to fear. And everything was lost as account of it. So he lost his dynasty. I love history. I study different things. One of them that always just gets under my skin and I can't figure out why is like Nicholas II of Russia. The Romanovs had ruled for 300 years. And in one 20-year period, not even that, he managed to lose the whole dynasty forever. Jeroboam doesn't stand alone in failing to lose the entire dynasty and empire. His rival, Rehoboam, does the exact same thing. And they both do it by similar means. I want you to sort of play Sherlock Holmes here, or a sleuth, and start looking at the details and seeing what you can figure out yourself about why did these men who had such great potential throw away everything and ruin what could have been theirs. They were promised it all, and it all got taken away from them. So Jeroboam was under Solomon, oddly enough, and he was well respected under Solomon. So much so, he was made basically the enforcer, the head of all forced labor for the entire nation. This is not a genealogy. This is the transfer of power between the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and how they were intermingled. I'm sorry the font is so small. I know you need like a telescope to see the words, but anyway. In 1 Kings 11, so Jeroboam, son of Nebat, rebelled against the king. He was one of Solomon's officials, an Ephraimite from Zeradah, and his mother was a widow named Zeruiah. Very interesting that he was raised by a widow. He did not have a father. Important factor to kind of remember in the back of your head. Here is the account of how he rebelled against the king. Solomon had built the terraces and had filled in the gaps of the wall the city of David, his father. Now Jeroboam was a man of standing. And when Solomon saw how well the young man did his work, he put him in charge of the whole forced labor of the tribes of Judah. Very interesting. Do we remember what happened to the guy who was in charge of forced labor under Rehoboam? What happened to him? He got stoned to death. So Jeroboam could have been in his shoes if he had stayed, but he was removed from the situation, and we're going to see that. But what's very interesting is that Jeroboam had real potential. He was noticed by the king. He was promoted by the king because of how well he did his work. Would that be a good thing to say about any of us? Yeah. I mean, why wouldn't we want to get promoted for the work we do? Why wouldn't we want to be recognized for how hard we had labored and be promoted to something better? And so he was. Solomon, who was one of the wisest kings, recognized Jeroboam's potential and said, move on up. I'm going to make you the head of all forced labor. So then in 1 Kings 11, it continues. About that time, Jeroboam was going out of Jerusalem, and Ahijah, the prophet of Shiloh, met him on the way, wearing a new cloak. The two of them went out alone into the country, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak that he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." Wow. Out of nothing. And it would have been a whole lot easier to tear an old cloak, but this is a brand new one. And he tears it into these 12 pieces. It says, "Here, I'm going to give you 10 of these 12 tribes." Now, in my mind, I was like, okay, Solomon didn't do a great job. Why not take 2 and give them to Jeremiah, or 50-50 maybe? But this is huge. He's getting 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. He's leaving the descendants of David's family 2 tribes to be in control of. Not much. But he says, "But for the sake of my servant David and the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, he will have 1 tribe. This will do because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Amorites, and have not walked in obedience to me, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my decrees and my laws as David, Solomon's father, did." Well, how did all this come about? We know from the Kings that Solomon married all these women of royal birth from all these other nations, 300 wives, 700 concubines altogether, 1,000 different women. And they all basically wanted this and this and this and this from their husband. He wrote blank checks to all of them, built temples and shrines for all these false gods all over the country. And that is why God chose Rehoboam to sort of restructure the country, get these 10 tribes away from all that idol worship. And it's amazing what happens. In continuing in chapter 11, it says, "But I will not take away the whole kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I will leave a ruler of all the days of his life for the sake of my servant, whom I have chosen, who obeyed my commandments and decrees. I will take the kingdom from his son's hands and give you 10 tribes. I give you 1 tribe to the son of David, my servant, that will always have a lamp for me in Jerusalem, the city I chose to put my name. However, as for you, I will take you and be ruler over all that your heart desires. You will be king over Israel. You will do whatever I command you and walk in obedience to me and do what is right in my eyes by obeying my decrees and commands. As David, my servant, did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David, and will give Israel to you. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever." Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt. And Shishak the king, who was Pharaoh basically, and stayed there until Solomon's death. So he gets banished from the kingdom because guess what? Solomon in his infinite wisdom finds out that God has promised this to him, so he's not going to allow Jeroboam to stay in the country any longer. What's interesting is that Shishak, Pharaoh of Egypt, basically went to war with Solomon and Rehoboam over and over again during this time. What's incredible about the situation here is that God promised that Jeroboam could have a dynasty as lasting as David's. Isn't that extraordinary? This man had that much potential that God saw that he could do this. And he says, I'll make you the same promise I basically made David if you obey my commands. And so what do you think God was really looking for? I mean, if God knows the end from the beginning, he knew, I guess, that Jeroboam was going to rebel and do his own thing and be a huge, colossal failure. So why give him this opportunity in the first place? Was it to hope that he would realize his full potential of what he could be? But it's interesting that he chooses a different path. Jeroboam, to give you the quick background, reigned for 22 years, approximately 928 to 907 BC. The two explanations have been offered for the meaning of his name, that God will increase the number of his people and who he fights for the battles for his people. A name appropriate to the fact that he led a rebellion against Rehoboam, Jeroboam, the mighty man of valor, whom King Solomon placed in charge of the corvée of Ephraim and Manasseh to fortify Jerusalem. Lift up his hand against the king. Ahijah, the Shilonite, supported Joab's rebellion and the promise to rule over the 10 tribes, as well as over the people who favored political this association from the house of David. So the details of this are quite extensive, but the point I want you to come away with is that God had hoped that Jeroboam would be another kind of David, that he would bring back the righteousness to the kingdom, and that is far from what happened. So, as you know, the kingdom gets divided because of Rehoboam's false or bad decision by listening to poor advice. What's amazing to this is that Solomon kind of predicts this in his own writings, and I think Ecclesiastes and in Proverbs. He says, who knows if all the wealth and all of the possessions that you amass during your lifetime will go to a wise man or a fool. And that's something you can't control after death. And his wisdom and all the efforts that he put together went to a fool. They summoned him, and Rehoboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam. So it's interesting. Here, suddenly, Jeroboam's back on the scene. Your father made your yoke difficult. You therefore lighten your father's harsh service and the heavy load he put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam replied, go home for 3 days and return to me. So the people left, and King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon when he was alive, asking, how do you advise me to respond to these people? They replied, today, if you will be a servant to these people and serve them, you will respond to them by speaking kind words to them. They will be your servants forever. Huge potential. A dynasty that is unbroken. If you do this, you will have them in the palm of your hands. If you don't, is what he should have told them what the consequences were going to be. He didn't see that. But it's interesting, Jeroboam is present when this whole thing is going on. Why is that important? It's because Solomon recognized him and made him the head of all forced labor. So he's like, aha, this is what's going on. And I was in charge of forced labor. I know how the people reacted to the heavy taxation and the burden on the people. I think I know these people and what's going to happen. But he, Rehoboam, rejected the advice of the elders. He had given him advice and consulted with the young men who had grown up with him and served him. And he asked them, what message do you advise that I send back to these people who said to me, lighten the yoke of your father who put on us? Then the young man who had grown up with them told them, this is what you should say to these people who ask for you. Your father made this heavy yoke, but you make it lighter on us? This is what you should tell them. My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. Although my father burdened you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. And my father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with barbed whips, or in another translation, scorpions. So very harsh response, and not what the people were willing to hear. So Joab and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, and the king had ordered, return to me on the third day. Then the king answered the people harshly. He rejected the advice of the elders had given him and spoke to them in accordance with the young men's advice. My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with barbed whips. Then the king did not listen to the people, because this turn of events came from the Lord to carry out his word, which the Lord had spoken through Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam, son of Nebat. When all Israel saw that the king had not listened to them, the people answered, what portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance of the son of Jesse. Israel, return to your tents. David, now look after your own house. So Israel went to their tents, but Rehoboam reigned over Israelites living in the city of Judah. Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was in charge of the forced labor. Remember, that was the position formerly held by Jeroboam. But all Israel stoned him to death. King Rehoboam managed to get into a chariot and flee to Jerusalem. Israel is in rebellion against the house of David until this day. So this had cataclysmic, almost tsunami-like effects on the entire nation. This house was divided forever. Until Christ returns, it will not be reunited. And it was basically fell apart because of the mistakes that Rehoboam made, and we're going to see what Jeroboam does with what's given to him. Then Jeroboam fortified Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. That was his new capital. And from there he went out and built up Peniel. Jeroboam thought to himself, and this is very important because God had just promised him all these 10 tribes, all this territory, all this potential, a lasting dynasty. And he says, my kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David if these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. They will again give their allegiance to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to Rehoboam. So this is distorted thinking. He takes something and runs 10 miles down the road with it. I am so guilty of this. I do this all the time. You take a scenario, you misinterpret it, you take it to its terminus, and it's so far away from reality, it's not even true. So based on this untested, incalculable fear that he has over losing what he's been given by the Lord, that's been promised to him by God, he's coming up with a new solution to the problem. Guess how far Jerusalem is from the borderline? 10 miles. That's it. 10 miles. They could cross the border and come back before sunset, but that's not what he was going to do. So I want to show you where he put these golden calves in Dan and Bethel. Dan is way up in the north near the Syrian border. Bethel is 10 miles from Jerusalem, not far at all. He sets up these golden calves, and where do they come from? None other than the Exodus, where Aaron made them, and also from Hathor in Egypt. So the southern kingdom is only Judah and Benjamin. Judah is surrounded by their enemies from the Philistines, the Moabites, the Edomites, and Ammon. Jeroboam fears, even though the Lord gave him 10 of the 12 tribes, the people will revert back to Rehoboam if they go to worship the Lord in Jerusalem. King Jeroboam builds the golden calves in Dan at Bethel because he wants to keep his subjects from serving God and being in the territory of Judah. So the king sought advice. Again, like Rehoboam, he's seeking advice from the wrong people. Then they made him 2 golden calves, and he said to them, "Go to Jerusalem. It's too difficult for you, Israel. Here is your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." He set up one in Bethel and put the other one in Dan. This led to sin because the people walked in procession before one of the calves all the way to Dan. So he's like, it's too much for you. It's too much of an effort. You know, you don't have to go to your local synagogue or church or even go to Jerusalem. It's something so accessible to you. It's easier. It's a lot less effort. And he did a whole lot more than that. So Jeroboam also built shrines on all the high places and set up priests from every class of people who were not Levites. Jeroboam made a festival in the 8th month on the 15th day of the month, just like the festival in Judah. He offered sacrifices on the altars. He made this offering in Bethel to sacrifice to the calves he had set up. He also stationed the priests in Bethel for the high places he had set up. He offered sacrifices on the altar that he had set up in Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month. He chose this month of his own. He made a festival for the Israelites, offering sacrifices on the altar and burned incense. So this is exactly what the people would have remembered from their own law, that there was this golden calf in the wilderness. What's incredible is he does this to block the Lord. He sets up festivals that are in direct conflict with what God has established. So they won't go. They'll go to his festival because they're more fun. And instead of the Levites, we're going to set up anybody to be a shrine priest or prophet, whatever they want. People will love this. It'll be the perfect thing. They get to step up to the roles that the Levites had, and I'm going to block their holidays. Instead of coming to my festivals and instead of coming to the Lord's things, they're going to abandon it and come to mine instead. So this is not what the Lord wanted, and the Lord's judgment on Jeroboam was severe. A man of God came to Judah and Bethel by revelations from the Lord while Jeroboam was standing beside the altar of burnt incense. And the man cried out against the altar by revelation from the Lord. "Altar, altar, this is what the Lord says. A son will be born to the house of David, named Josiah, and he will sacrifice on you the priest of the high places who you are burning incense to. Human bones will be burned on you. He gave you a sign that day," he said. "This is a sign that the Lord has spoken. The altar will now be ripped apart, and the ashes that are on it will be poured out." When the king heard the word that the man of God had cried out against the altar in Bethel, Jeroboam stretched out his hand from the altar and said, "Arrest him." But the hand stretched out against him withered, and he could not pull it back to himself. The altar was ripped apart, and the ashes poured from the altar according to the sign of the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. Then the king responded to the man of God, "Plead for the favor of the Lord your God and pray for me so that my hand might be restored." So the man of God pleaded for the favor of the Lord, and the king's hand was restored to him because it was as it was in the first. Then the king declared to the man of God, "Come home with me, refresh yourself, and I'll give you a reward." But the man of God replied, If you were to give me half of your house, I couldn't go with you, and I wouldn't eat bread or drink water with this place. For this is what I was commanded by the word of the Lord: you must not eat bread or drink water or go back by the way you came. So he went another way and did not go back to the way he had come to Bethel. So this is the lower one, the calf that is 10 miles away from Jerusalem. He gets rid of the one down in Bethel. What's interesting is that Jeroboam's hand withered up. And this is symbolic, I kind of think, because this is what God had wanted him to be, the strong arm of the Lord in the house of Israel, and to get them to focus on the Lord's decrees, and he abandoned it. So just like the promise that he had given to Jeroboam, because of his rebellion, it all withered. It all shrunk away of what it could have been because of how wicked he became. Then Ahijah heard the sound of the feet entering the door. This is the disaster that happens on the house of Jeroboam. And I'll basically just surmise it so that we don't have to read it all. But his wife, Jeroboam's wife, comes to she was going to go out to one of the other gods, and basically the revelation was given to Ahijah that he was blind at the time, that she was coming to his house, and that she was disguised, but her son was very sick, and the whole point was that this disaster was going to come over the whole house of Jeroboam. So let's pick up in verse 8. That my people Israel tore the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to you, but you were not like my servant David, who kept the commands and followed me with all your heart, doing what was right in my eyes. You have behaved more wickedly than all who were before you. In order to provoke me, you have proceeded to make for yourself other gods and cast images, and have flung me behind your back. Because of all this, I am going to bring disaster on the house of Jeroboam. I will eliminate all of Jeroboam's males, both slave and free, in Israel. I will sweep away the house of Jeroboam as one sweeps away dung until it is all gone. Anyone who belongs to Jeroboam and dies in the city, the dogs will eat. And anyone who dies in the field, the birds of the sky will eat. The Lord has said it. So all this potential, a lasting dynasty, 10 tribes, everything, he threw it away. And now, as a recompense for this, his whole household is going to be obliterated, annihilated. There will be no more. As for you, get up and go to your house. When your feet enter the city, the boy will die. All Israel will mourn for him and bury him. He alone, out of Jeroboam's basically whole house, will be put into the family tomb, because out of the house of Jeroboam, the Lord God of Israel found something good only in him. The whole rest of the household of Jeroboam was worthless. This one kid who's going to die was the only bit of good that there was. The Lord will raise up for himself a king over Israel who will eliminate the house of Jeroboam. This is the day, yes, even today. For the Lord God will strike Israel, and the people will shake as a reed shakes in water. He will uproot Israel from this good soil that he gave your ancestors. He will scatter them beyond the Euphrates because they made their Asherah poles, provoking the Lord. He will give up Israel because Jeroboam's sins that he committed and caused Israel to commit. Then Jeroboam's wife got up and left and went to Tisra, and when she crossed the threshold of the house, the boy died. And he was buried, and all Israel mourned for him, according to the word of the Lord that he had spoken through the servant Ahijah the prophet. For the rest of the events of Jeroboam's reign and how he waged war and how he reigned, note that they are written in the historical records of the kings, Israel's kings. And the length of Jeroboam's reign was 22 years. He rested with his fathers, and his son Nadab became king in his place. This doesn't go well either. God promised him a lasting dynasty if he obeyed. Jeroboam came out of exile to see the foolishness of Rehoboam and not make the same mistakes. Rehoboam listened to bad advice, followed it, and lost his dynasty. Jeroboam does the same thing. He seeks bad advice. He follows it to his own destruction, to the end of the empire. The sin that caused Israel to commit never went away and lasted throughout all the kings of Israel. it reads like a continuous foreboding, the sin that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, caused Israel to sin. So this is to give you a little demonstration of the first dynasty, second dynasty, the northern and southern kingdom, of how they fall. But basically, his only lasted 4 kings, from Jeroboam to Nadab to Abasa and Elah, and then it changes to Zimri and down here to Omri. In the 18th year of Israel's king Jeroboam, son of Nebat, Abijah became king over Judah, and he reigned 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Machia, daughter of Abishalom, and Abijah walked in the ways of the sins of his father before him had committed. And he was not completely devoted to the Lord as God as his ancestor David had been. But because David, the Lord, his God, gave him a lamp in Jerusalem to raise up a son after him and establish Jerusalem. For David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and he did not turn aside from anything he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. There had been war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of Rehoboam's life. So that's another important factor. Because of this, there was constant civil war between the house of Judah and the house of Israel for this entire time. The rest of the events of Abiram's reign, along with his accomplishments, are written in the historical record of the Judah's kings. There was also war between Abijam and Jeroboam. Abijam rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. His son Asa became king in his place. So this warfare goes on between all these different kings back and forth as they live and die from the time that this rebellion happened. Nadab, son of Jeroboam, became king over Israel in the 2nd year of Judah's king Asa. He reigned over Israel 2 years. Nadab did what was evil in the Lord's sight and followed the example of his father and the sin he caused Israel to commit. Then Baasha, son of Ahijah, the house of Issachar, conspired against Nadab, and Baasha struck him down at Gibbethon of the Philistines, while Nadab and all Israel were besieging Giberoth. In the 3rd year of Judah's king Asa, Baasha killed Nadab and reigned in his place. When Baasha became king, he struck down the entire house of Jeroboam. He did not leave Jeroboam any survivors, but destroyed his family according to the word of the Lord he spoken through his servant Abijah at the Shilonite. This was because Jeroboam had provoked the Lord God of Israel by sins he had committed and by causing Israel to commit. The rest of the events of Nadab's reign, along with all of his accomplishments, are they not written in the historical record of Israel's kings? And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, throughout their reigns. So basically, this is when it's capitulated, right? The whole thing ends. This horrible sin is over with, right? No. They may have gotten rid of the entire house of Jeroboam, but have they gotten rid of his influence? No. This continues for a long, long time. This is basically the site where Jeroboam's calf was in the city of Tel Dan. And it's incredible because Gershom had set up something here. The snake that was in the snake that was in the wilderness, Nehushtan, wound up in Dan in the same place. So this has a long historical precedent of serving these false gods, whether it was Nehushtan from the bronze serpent or the graven image that the son of Gershom of Moses made, and they worshipped it there in Dan. When God had torn Israel from the house of David, he made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, king. Jeroboam drove away from following the Lord and made them commit a greater sin. The sons of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which they did, and they did not depart until the Lord removed Israel from his sight, and he spoke through all of his servants, the prophets. So Israel was carried away from the exile of their own land into Assyria unto this day. So this basically is a foreshadowing of all the future kings that were going to happen, and them finally being stripped off the land and taken to Assyria and Babylon. It never went away, but this site has actually been found. This is the entrance to the city of Dan that's there as an archaeological site. And I'm not going to read all these, don't worry. I just want you to see, these are all the future kings of Israel, and you can see in the red, every single case, it's tied back over and over again, right back to Jeroboam and his sin. And it reads like an echo all the way through the kings of the Chronicles, that they did evil in the sight of the Lord and walked in the ways of Jeroboam, the sin which he made Israel to sin, all the way through. So here's Ahaziah, Jehoram, Jehu, Jehoahaz, all the rest of the kings. And it basically says in 2 Kings at the end, when he had torn Israel out of the house of David, they made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, king. Then Jeroboam drove away from following the Lord and made them commit this great sin. So it sort of surmises what happened to all the kings of Israel. This is the actual site today, and you can see that it was added on to by all these other kings over and over and over again. Ahab built an altar there. You've got Jeroboam, of course, and several, Rehoboam the second. There's basically a isometric drawing showing you the stairs that were added by this person. It just continued and continued and continued to be an altar worshiped by the Lord. So the lessons for us: we have a great potential planned by God, fulfilled in Christ, that we can manifest. Who do we listen to and attain wisdom to and get the advice we need so this doesn't happen to us? You really have tremendous skills and gifts from the Lord. How do we take our talents and double them or triple them or make them 100-fold? It's by abiding in Christ, as John chapter 13, 14, and 15 says, unless you abide in me, you cannot bear any fruit. Both Rehoboam and Jeroboam fell because they refused to take good counsel, and their disaster was both crushing and permanent. Think of it. These two men caused history that could not be undone practically forever. Rehoboam's folly basically split the house of Israel, and it was never put back together again. It won't be till Christ returns. Jeroboam caused Israel to plunge into sin head first, and they couldn't get out of it until they were taken into exile in Egypt. So Jeroboam shows us that when we worry what we will lose, what we have, we no longer believe God has provided it. And that's the important factor. We don't believe that God has given it to us. Is God going to give us something and then take it away? He's only going to take it away if we rebel against him permanently. So that's what's going on, is that they were so worried. And he goes to great lengths to save it and cost them everything. We want to be shepherd leaders and not aggressive opportunists. All these men, Jeroboam, Absalom, and Jeroboam son of Nebat, did everything they could to hold on to their power and their influence, and they lost it all as a result of it. Let us never be said of us, they did what was evil in the Lord's sight. They did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam son of Nebat, which had made Israel to cause sin, but was walked in them. We may think that we can distance ourselves from Jeroboam, but what he did was very simple. This is the lesson I want us to come away with. Just fill up your lives with events, ceremonies, functions that block God's way out. And all the people followed his example. They were too busy for the Lord, and they had other plans. It's the same parable we get with the wedding banquet. They all said, oh, I'd come, but I just bought a field. Oh, I just came, but I bought a cow. Oh, but I just got married. So we can choose to block the Lord out very simply. It's very easy. We just make our lives too busy to serve the Lord. And this is what Psalms 10, starting at verse 2 says, in his arrogance, this wicked man hunts down the weak, so they are caught up in schemes he devises. He boasts about his cravings of his heart. He blesses the greedy and reviles the Lord. In his pride, the wicked man does not seek him. In all of his thoughts, there is no room for God. In his ways, they are all prosperous. Your laws are rejected by him. He sneers at all of his enemies. He says to himself, nothing will ever shake me. He swears, no one will ever do me harm. For us, let us be the opposite of this. Let's move away from this thought pattern because it is corrupted thinking. You know, when the Lord has so much promise for us and he has such gifts that he wants us to fulfill in this life so he can give us even more in the kingdom age. Don't lose it by your own fear or your worry or by taking bad advice. We abide in the vine. We are in the vine of the Lord, and he will allow us to bear much fruit. Thank you.